Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Hello, everybody. And it's that time again for Apologetics. You've entered into the Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. I'm Gary Michuta, your host, your sensei, your good friend, here to talk about how to explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, confidence, and all that good stuff. And we've got a great program in store for you today. Listen to these titles. Tell me what you think they all have in common. Don't Pass Me By, God Only Knows, Spirit in the Sky, Soul and Inspiration, I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, I Go to Pieces, Did You Ever Have to Make Up Your Mind, Little Bit O' Soul, I'm a Believer, Victoria, Yesterday's Papers, When Homeward Bound, and Along Comes Mary. What do they all have in common? Well, if you're a fan of music, you'll know they're all titles to songs. But what they all have in common is that they outline the conversion story of our guest, who is none other than Dr. Dawn Eden Goldstein, who is wrote a book, an incredible book called Sunday Will Never Be the Same. A rock and roll journalist opens her eyes to God. So she's going to come on the show, share her conversion story from Judaism through the turmoil of rock and roll, eventually to Christianity and the Catholic Church. And Dr. Goldstein is going to give us, download some reason for us, logic, and hopefully lots of good spiritual direction. And also, as always, we do our critical thinking exercises. Today's Finding the Fallacy it's a Latin title. For those who love Latin, it's Argumentum ad Populum, otherwise known as the Argument to the Poplar. So that's a popular fallacy, so we're going to dive into that. Also, we're going to meet the early church father for today, and actually the early church father is not a individual, or at least a known individual. It's known as the Apostolic Canon. So that's going to be it's going to change things up a little bit, and we're going to look at what is the Apostolic Canon, where did it come from, what did it have to say. That's going to be loads of fun as well. And as always, you are part of the program, so especially when Dr. Dawn comes on, give us a call at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. It should be an interesting conversation. She's rubbed elbows with some of the great and maybe somewhat obscure but nevertheless great music bands and leaders in rock and roll in the late 60s and 70s. So it's going to be fun. And as always, you can send us your emails if you ever have any questions or comments. Who knows? Maybe you're in a situation where a loved one is mentioned that they're going to leave the faith, or they're having questions about the faith. You're not really sure how to address it. Shoot us an email at questions@handsonapologetics.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, I reply. I don't mention all of them, but I do reply to every email. Sometimes I mention them on the air and even read them on the air. So if you want it to be private, just put it in the comments, and I'll be glad not to put it out. But if you're okay with letting people know, I could always change the name or whatever. Lots of good stuff to learn from these kinds of writings. And as always, it's time for us to give our shout-outs to those watching live stream on social media, such as Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Great to see you. And, lots of familiar names. A couple of new names, I think. No, most of them are familiar names there on YouTube. Well, it's great to see you. Thanks for emojis and mouse pal. Appreciate it. And thank you for listening, either live off your radio station, or if you're listening to podcast. And I always try to throw this in because there's all sorts of awesome resources out there. We are privileged to live in an age where we can access information right at the tips of our fingers. I mean, even Yeah, I was telling somebody, actually, it was during one of my online classes. I was telling the high school students that back in the day, in the early 90s, when I wanted to respond to an anti-Catholic charge, I had to jump in my car, drive down to the seminary here in Detroit, go to the library, spend hours in front of a copy machine, bring stuff home, buy used books. It was really arduous to come up with a really, all the source material needed to refute claims. Today, you just jump on the internet and you're done in like 5 minutes. It's amazing. So, but the thing is, most us Catholics, we aren't even aware of these resources. So, if you want to access one of our programs, just go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. That's our website, all one word, virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Click to our shows and scroll down to Hands on Apologetics or any other great shows here on Virgin Most Powerful. And you have access to every single show we've ever done. So if you want to learn something about the Mass, we have a couple of shows on the Mass. I go into the sacrifice of Mass. If you want to listen to some of the best and most cutting-edge apologists out there, scholars, and even some very, very fascinating conversions, all of them are up there on podcast. You can download them, you can share them, and you can pass it around, let people know. In fact, we appreciate everyone. Let your friends know about us. Like us on social media. Share us. Pass the goodies around, so to speak. Without further ado, why don't we jump into our critical thinking skill exercise for today to build up those skills. It is finding the fallacy. And the fallacy for today, like I mentioned, is the argumentum ad populum, or the argument to the people. And so I said it's a popular fallacy, but because that's kind of funny, because the fallacy itself is actually arguing that a position is true because it is popular, because most people believe it, or many people believe it. Sometimes this kind of goes under the heading of common knowledge. I don't know how many times over my career as apologist I've heard people say, well, come on, Gary, it's common knowledge that blank, fill in the blank. And so the idea is, well, since many people, or even most people, believe something to be true, well, then that's an argument for its truth. Well, if you leave it at that, I guess it could be fallacious. There are sometimes where, if so many people believe something, if they've investigated it critically, that could actually be an argument for the truth. Let me give you an example. Thomas Aquinas gave his 5 proofs for the existence of God, the famous 5 ways, is Summa, back in the 13th century. And we still use them today. And it's funny how many people today will say, oh, that's, no one believes that. Those are false. That even a child would know that they're incorrect. Well, there's been people, philosophers out there over the hundreds of years who have studied it and examined it. And true, some try to find fault. But the fact that it stands the test of time, that should tell you at least that it's not something so simple and erroneous that a child could figure it out. So I think in a way you could make an argument to the popular that does legitimately prove, at least points to the plausibility of something being true. But if you're just saying something is true because everybody believes it or everybody does it, that is the fallacy. There you go. So, like I said, it's a popular fallacy indeed. So let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father for today. And like I said, an early church father today really isn't an individual. It is a document. And the document's called the Apostolic Canon. It's written sometime around the year AD 400. So, still early church, but kind of in the middle of where we would put the early church fathers who run roughly from 80 AD to the 9th century. Okay, what is it? It's a work that constitutes 47 chapters in book 8, of yet another early church father who is also a book, the Apostolic Constitutions. So let me unpack that for you. There is a collection of work called the Apostolic Constitutions, written roughly around the same time, around 400. And within the Apostolic Constitutions, there's the so-called Apostolic Canons. And so the Apostolic Canons is 47 chapter, the 47th chapter of the book 8 of that. Okay, so hopefully everyone's clear on that. Chances are everybody's confused, just like me. All right, so apparently, supposedly, Pope St. Clement I was the author of the Apostolic Constitutions, although this is false. This is a pseudepigraphic work that claims to be Clement's work. And so, therefore, you could say that the pseudo-Clement, whoever he may be, is also the author of the Apostolic Canons. It was compiled and inserted in the book. The Apostolic Canons deal mostly with the issues of ordination, duties, and conducts of clergy, and it's in the form of what would resemble the canons of a council. Okay. In fact, the first 20 of the 85 Apostolic Canons are taken almost verbatim from the canons of the Council of Antioch in 341. There's some interesting features in this book. The Apostolic Canons, Canon 85, gives a list of canonical books of Scripture, but it's kind of defective. It misses some Old Testament books, namely some of the Deuterocanon. It also includes 3rd Maccabees as part of the canon, and that's kind of singular. You don't really find that in any other list other than these canons. And it's also defective in the New Testament in that it lists all the New Testament books except for the book of Revelation. Let's see. It's also has an addition to these books, the letter of Clement to the Corinthians, or First Clement, which the authentic Clement of Rome wrote. So that's included among the New Testament books. So it's kind of strange. It's an eclectic work indeed. And that's Meet the Early Church Father for today, the Apostolic Canons. Coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to talk to Dr. Dawn Eden.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet 3 men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. 2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. We did before we get a hold of our guest, I want to go over a couple of things. I received an email from last program that we did for more information. And last program, by the way, if you missed it, you should check it out. It is the April 17th broadcast of a Hands-On Apologetics, where Carl Keating came into the dojo yesterday. And we're going through a list of those books that every Catholic apologist ought to have or read on their shelves. And he mentioned it. And by the way, for those watching on live stream, you'll actually be able to see this. This is Theology and Sanity by Frank Sheed. And I received several emails from people saying who publishes, because I'd like to pick up a copy. So it is published by Ignatius Press. So if you just Google Ignatius Press and just go through the catalog, you see Theology and Sanity by Frank Sheed. A great book. And, the funny thing is, Carl and I both love the same thing about the book, namely that Frank Sheed gives probably one of the most easily accessible explanations of the Trinity out there. He totally avoids philosophical language, conceptual language that can trip people up, and walks you step by step through it. So I highly, highly recommend that book. That's definitely one of the first books I read when I got into apologetics, and I still consult it. It's Frank Sheed's a very, very clear author indeed. But speaking of books, why don't we go to our guest who authored an incredible book called Sunday Will Never Be the Same. A rock and roll journalist opens her ears to God. And that is Dr. Eden Goldstein, whose previous books include The Thrill of the Chaste, My Peace I Give to You. She began her career as a rock and roll historian using the pen name Dawn Eden. And in the 1990s, contributed to Billboard, The Village Voice, Mojo, Salon, and co-wrote the Encyclopedia of Singles. She went to work in editorial positions at the New York Post and the Daily News. And at the age of 31, Dr. Goldstein, who was raised Jewish, experienced encountered with the divine, and that personal transformation led her ultimately to the Catholic Church. She received and earned a doctorate in sacred theology from the University of St. Mary's of Lake, and she's an assistant professor of dogmatic theology in the online division of Holy Apostles College and Seminary, lives in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Dawn, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's great to be on.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this because I was so intrigued with your book. I started the program by reading the chapter titles to your book. It's like, these chapter titles sound remarkably like I've heard them before.
That's right. Well, my book is called Sunday Will Never Be the Same. And as you said, I wrote it under my full name, Dawn Eden Goldstein, which is certainly new for me because my previous books were under my pen name, Dawn Eden. And as you say, with the chapter titles, like both the book title and the chapter titles are all taken from 60s pop tunes because This is my memoir, and a big part of my journey was that I was a rock and roll historian writing about 60s pop.
Yeah, that was so clever. I thought, wow, this just reading the titles kind of summarizes your life in a sense. But
that's the funny thing. It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all have that feeling where there's this song that is my life, and so because a lot of these 60s pop songs like Along Comes Mary are part of me, it was easy coming up with songs that would serve for chapter titles for my memoir.
Yeah, right. God definitely has a sense of humor.
Yes.
The title could mean one thing in one context, but have completely different meaning in another.
It's really true. I remember when I interviewed the association, they told me about how surprised they were after Along Comes Mary was a hit when nuns would come up to them and say, "Thank you for writing a song about our mother."
Wow. Well, why don't we start at the beginning? I understand
Sure.
that you were raised in a Jewish household.
Yes, that's right. I was raised in a Reformed Jewish household, so that's one of the more liberal branches of Judaism. But I certainly did have an understanding of my Jewish identity as a child, and I had some education in the faith. I was a bat mitzvah, which is the word for the for the ceremony when the girl, or for a boy, bar mitzvah, is able to come to the pulpit and read from the Torah. That's when they become an adult in the faith. So I certainly went through that experience. And then when I was a teenager, in part because of wounds that I suffered as a child, including the wound of abuse, I began to really doubt God's love for me. And so that's when I really started to seek transcendence and escape through rock and roll.
Yeah, and that's the one thing about music is that not all music, but the best music seems to point beyond itself, to something higher than just notes and people singing, but a kind of beauty.
Yes, I think that's right. I think that even people who don't think that they're seeking something higher, when they go to concerts, they want something from that group experience, from the kind of communion that they feel with other fans of the music, and from the kind of communion that they feel with the band that's playing live just for them. So, I think that in my experience of rock and roll, although I was also seeking music that had a spiritual element, something that was deep and moved me, I think that the experience of concerts helped me to understand things that I only learned about much later when I was studying Catholic theology, about how God, through the Holy Spirit, connects us both to Him and to one another. Like when we go to Mass, we have that experience of being connected to God and also to our fellow worshipers. And in retrospect, I can look back and see that as something that I was seeking in, however an imperfect way, through the whole rock experience.
Yeah, right, because it is community building in a way.
Yes.
Especially like you said, at concerts, you do get a feeling like that you're all together, and there's a very intimate surrounding where it's hard for me to even grasp for words for it. But you're right, though.
And that you're connected
there's a
to something
unifying
larger
aspect
than
to it.
yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Now, when people, I think someone in your situation, you would think that that you would gravitate towards rock and roll as a kind of destructive rebellion, something that you could raise your fist, against your parents or whatever. But that was different for you, though.
Right. I mean, I went through a very brief time of that when I was in high school and was listening to some punk music, but I got bored with the punk very quickly because my real heart was in pop. So I discovered these 60s bands like the Left Bank and the Zombies and the Kinks and the Beach Boys, and that became to me a model of how music should sound. One thing I really loved about it was that there were limits to it, that these pop musicians had 3 minutes and they were using tape that had 4 tracks, meaning that there were limits on what they could do in the studio to get the sound the way they wanted it to sound. And I was impressed at how they were able to create great art within these limitations. And again, it was only much later as a Catholic that I read Chesterton saying that the most important part of a work of art is the frame. and then later when I got into the Mass, and I saw that the Mass is something where it has to be said with the same words, the same gestures every time. There's a certain variety in what prayers the priest can choose, but he can't just do a free-form Mass, and that there's a beauty in that the Spirit works in that. And, looking back, I think that that's something that I really admired about 60s pop music as well, that there was room for a certain kind of creative spirit that existed properly within limitations. Once it got into acid rock and the whole Woodstock thing where guitarists could just noodle, it wasn't nearly as creative or interesting.
Yeah. In fact, you brought up an interesting point because, as part of music phenomenon is that songs are redone by different artists. And it'll be the same instrumentation, the same music, same key, but for one artist, the song just soars, and another artist doing the exact same thing, it falls flat. But with the Mass, it's always the same no matter who is celebrating the Mass.
Well, that's the thing. It certainly is the same grace. It's the same graces. That's true. I would say though, with Aquinas that although we looking at a priest from the outside, as long as the priest is saying the right prayers, from the outside we might not be able to can't tell his heart. But from the side of the priest's heart, if the priest is really praying the Mass deeply and is living a holy life, then Aquinas says that even though it's the same Jesus that the faithful receive, that they might get a little something extra. and I like that. I think that sort of speaks to the difference between a musician who simply sees the notes as being notes on a page to play and a musician who really identifies with the song. They might technically play the same way, but I think somehow the audience can feel the difference.
Wow, yeah, that's a really good point. I never considered it from that point. Okay, we're coming up to the break. I hate to move on with the story. So when we come back, maybe you can kind of explain, how rock and roll kind of, or maybe even things outside of rock, what started moving you towards Christianity. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Great.
Sure, I'll
All
be
right.
happy to talk about that. Thanks.
We are talking with Dr. Dawn Edith Goldstein about her amazing book, Sunday Will Never Be the Same, A Rock and Roll Journalist Opens Her Eyes to God. If you want to join the conversation on the other side of the break, give us a call at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. And we will be right back right after this break.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites The Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are talking with a guest. You probably know her best as Dawn Eden, who contributed articles to such things as Billboard, Village Voice, Mojo, and lots of other secular and but popular newspapers and so on. And she's talking about her journey of faith from Judaism to Christianity, eventually to Catholicism. And so how did you get into the line of work of being a rock and roll journalist?
Well, that's a great question. I talk about that in my new memoir, Sunday Will Never Be the Same. And in it, I tell about how it started when I was in high school. I was living in the New Jersey suburbs and used to make these excursions by train to Greenwich Village. This was during the mid-'80s, and I would go to my favorite record stores there, and I knew someone who worked in a record store who put out what was then called a fanzine. So before the age of the internet, if somebody was into underground music that wasn't played on the radio, and they really wanted to spread the word about it, they would actually start their own magazine, which they would type and photocopy and distribute. So I met a fanzine publisher who worked at a record store who asked me if I wanted to transcribe an interview that he had done. And that was my first introduction into that world. And then once I was in college at NYU in 1985, I started to meet people who were in the mainstream magazine world. Started to write for Goldmine, which still exists. It's a magazine for record collectors, for fans of oldies music. And since I was getting into the oldies, it was an opportunity for me to track down bands, musicians I admired and get their stories. So I had a wonderful career doing that, and I'm really thankful that I managed to interview a lot of people who have since gone to the Lord, and I've gotten their stories. I've interviewed people like Harry Nilsson, Del Shannon, Leslie Gore, Gene Pitney, and those are experiences and stories that I've heard from them that I'll treasure.
Wow.
But at the same time, I was doing this work that I loved when I was in my 20s during by then the 1990s. I was also suffering from the wounds of the childhood abuse that I mentioned. I didn't know it at the time, but I had PTSD. It's often misdiagnosed. In my case, it was diagnosed just as major depression. But with these wounds that I had that caused the PTSD, I was suffering from dark, self-destructive thoughts. Thank God I wasn't into drugs or alcohol, but I did try to escape in other ways. I tried to escape through seeking love in ways that weren't healthy for me, and I also tried to escape in music. And I have to say that that it was the music in particular that God really used to save me, because as long as I could think, well, here's some unknown artist from the 60s, and I have to make this artist known by writing about him or her, then that would keep me going and make me feel like I had some purpose in life during those dark days.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a sense, it's it gives you a goal to I guess immortalize someone, or at least keep it in the public's conscience about.
Yes, and it's interesting. I look back and I see that when I was trying to spread the word about this obscure rock musician named Kurt Betcher, Boettcher, who actually produced the Association hit "Along Comes Mary" along with other great 60s records. Well, he had died. I never got to meet him. So when I found out that I was too late to meet him, he had only died a few months before I even found out where he had lived, I determined to tell his story. And in retrospect, in spreading the word, really the gospel of Kurt Betcher, I think that I was practicing for when I would be spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ, because I had that fervor and that sense that there's something really good here. There's some good news and people need to hear about it. And I was willing to overcome obstacles, including just the obstacle of being a teenager. I was just 19 at that time when I started to research Kurt Betcher, and I was willing to overcome obstacles to do that. So, I have to try to remember that now as an adult. That same fervor and that same willingness to undergo resistance I should take into spreading the gospel about someone who truly is eternal.
Yeah, boy, it's amazing how God can use our love, even if it's directed not directly at Him, but through some beauty in His creation, and use that to kind of pull us out in darkness and form us. And yeah, that's amazing.
Yes.
Now,
thank you.
Oh, I was going to say after you.
All right, thank you. Well, I was just going to say that if you go to Wikipedia and you look up Kurt Betcher, Boettcher, you'll see this lengthy article that's curated by many different people. And if you go to, CD, discography websites, you'll see that there are all these dozens of CDs of music that he produced. And all of that came after I did that initial research. And it's heartening for me to see that my dream of spreading the word about Kurt Betcher was successful, and it gives me hope now that God is using me to spread the word about the good things He's done in my life, that He will accomplish that too. But we don't always get to see these fruits in our lifetime, but Lord willing, He can enable us to plant seeds.
Exactly. Yeah. That's great. When you're interviewing people, I'm thinking of. I think you mentioned John Carter.
Yes, that's right.
Did some of these interviews kind of give you a nudge towards Christianity, like when you met with him? Yes, very much so. In that new memoir of mine, Sunday Will Never Be the Same, I do tell about interviewing John Carter, or actually meeting him. I didn't actually interview him, but I met him. I was introduced through a friend in London, and he had written some hit songs of the 60s that many listeners would know, like Herman's Hermits, Can't You Hear My Heartbeat, and a one-hit wonder song by a group called the Music Explosion called Little Bit of Soul. Yeah. And I remember that a friend of mine had told me before I met John Carter that Little Bit of Soul was a Christian song, because it had that line, you've got to make like you're on your knees and pray, and then a little bit of soul will come your way. And I just thought that was the most ridiculous thing, because obviously it's just this garage band song about dancing, and I just thought, the last thing that it could be would be something Christian. But when I got to meet the songwriter, John Carter, I said to him, just, thinking that I could show my friend back home that he was wrong, I said to him, I have this friend who says that Little Bit of Soul is a Christian song.
isn't that funny? And John Carter just said, completely straight face, it is. And I was like, what? Because I knew that John Carter wasn't this active Christian. And John explained to me that his lyricist, Ken Lewis, was a Christian, and that Ken wanted to experiment to see if he could get a song with Christian lyrics into the pop charts. And he succeeded. And
Wow.
so it was only after that I went back and I read all the lyrics, and the lyrics are, when you're feeling low and the fish won't bite, you need a little bit of soul to put you right. And all of a sudden you realize it is just gospel lyrics.
Yeah.
So that certainly, looking back, was a definite nudge, I would say.
Yeah, that's funny because that reminded me of your chapter titles. It's like you could look at it and just enjoy it as, it's a chapter title, but on the other hand, in a different context, it has completely different meaning.
Yes, and occasionally it does happen that these things are proven to be Christian. There's another song that's kind of like that. The Beatles' "Let It Be." That's a song that many people interpret as being a Marian song because Mary said, "Let it be done unto me according to thy word."
Yeah.
Paul McCartney says that he didn't have Mary in mind when he wrote it, that he had a dream about his mother, whose name was Mary, and that his mother, who had died, said to him at a time when he was worried, "Let it be." But even so, even if that's McCartney's conscious mind, we know also that Paul McCartney grew up Catholic. He had that formation.
I didn't know that.
And even if his mother did appear to him in a dream, his mother could have been quoting Mary.
Yeah, yeah.
So these songs do have layers of meaning.
Yeah. Was George Harrison, did he grow up Catholic, do you know?
Yes, actually he did, and his sister Louise was an observant Catholic who lived in the United States. And I think she actually did some evangelism for the faith. So yeah, he certainly had that formation. There's a funny story about George Harrison that George Harrison told back in about 1969 or so, or early 1970. John and
it looks like
George,
the music's going to come
break?
up. I hate for you to start the story and then we have to go to the break.
Okay, I can tell it after the break.
Yes, absolutely. We're talking with Dr. Dawn Eden about her book, Sunday Will Never Be the Same, a rock and roll journalist opens her ears to God, which is available through Catholic Answers Press. Stay tuned, everybody. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're talking with Dr. Dawn Eden Goldstein about her journey into the Catholic faith. That's in Sunday Will Never Be the Same. A rock and roll journalist opens her eyes to God. It's through Catholic Answers Press. And I have to apologize. When I'm really into a conversation, time slips away, and then we get interrupted by a break. Yeah, so you were talking about George Harrison, one of the Beatles.
Yes, because you were asking if George Harrison had a Catholic background, and I just read this story from George about the final days of the Beatles, or it might have been just after they officially broken up, when he and John Lennon were each working on solo recordings at Abbey Road Studios, where they had formerly recorded as a band. And John was recording a song called God, which was a real cry of the heart, a cry of his kind of confusion and frustration, where he was just sort of ranting about all the things that he claimed at that point that he didn't believe in, including Jesus. Later on, John became much friendlier to the idea of Christian faith. But the thing that George Harrison said about that time was that where John was in one room at Abbey Road singing "I Don't Believe in Jesus," George was in another room singing "My Sweet Lord." So there was a bit of a contrast there.
That's funny. Yeah. That was if someone's walking down the hallway going from one studio to another, that would be a remarkable contrast, wouldn't it? Well,
yes, exactly.
So, what was the first thing that kind of opened your eyes to the Catholic Church possibly being the faith you need to be in?
Well, I was doing an interview by phone with a rock musician who was a member of a power pop band from Los Angeles called the Sugar Plastic, and I thought I would ask him a question, just sort of something off the wall, something he doesn't get asked very often. So I asked him what he was reading lately, and he answered that he was reading this book, which, as it happened, I'd never heard of, and it was by an author I'd never heard of. It was called The Man Who Was Thursday, a novel by G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah. Now,
I imagine your listeners, probably many of them know who Chesterton was, but for myself as a 27-year-old rock and roll journalist, Jewish, I had no idea that Chesterton was this great Anglican convert to Catholicism. So I went and picked up this novel, The Man Who Was Thursday, and as I tell in my memoir, Sunday Will Never Be the Same, what I found in this novel was an understanding of Christian faith that was just something different from what I'd experienced before. That it was this something countercultural, that it was this kind of bulwark of sanity in a world that had gone mad. And something about what Chesterton said made me think that maybe there was a way to find peace in Christian faith. And he wrote about it with humility, and that really impressed me. I know some people who read some of Chesterton's more apologetic works may be surprised to hear me say that he wasn't triumphalist. But The Man Who Was Thursday is not a triumphalist novel. It's a novel that's deep and sensitive and looks at the mystery of suffering. It's actually a great novel for Holy Week. So in reading that, whereas I had this impression from Christians that, their faith really centered on sort of being number one, being the best. In The Man Who Was Thursday, I saw this image of Christian faith as being an identification with God, who has by some mystery gone through an experience that has given him this interior knowledge of suffering, of pain, and to even think of God as being able to identify with my pain was just a revelation for me. So that certainly got me curious. And then I write in Sunday Will Never Be the Same of a number of other ways that God used different things in my life to lead me to a certainty that my home was in the Catholic Church.
Wow. So when was the first time you actually attended a Catholic Mass?
I am told that I attended Catholic Mass when I was in middle school because I was doing a report on it. I have no memory of that. So in terms of actually attending it, intending to be Catholic, it would have been in the beginning of 2005.
Yeah. What was your impression? Were you studying about Catholicism, or
actually, come to think of it, no. I attended Catholic Mass actually when I was on the G.K. Chesterton pilgrimage, which I talk about in Sunday Will Never Be the Same. I was Protestant for 5 years before becoming Catholic, and during that time, I went on a pilgrimage with members of the G.K. Chesterton Society to England, and it wasn't advertised as a Catholic pilgrimage. It was advertised as a pilgrimage visiting Chesterton sites. But it turned out that I was the only non-Catholic on this pilgrimage. So that's when I experienced daily Mass, and I didn't have anything against it, but I just thought it was boring. I thought that there was not much for me to really hang on to there, and that's because I didn't understand what's going on. God bless you, Gary, and your colleague Jesse, and other apologists who really explain to people what the Mass is, because that's how people discover that it's something not boring at all, but exciting and deep.
Yeah. No, I was curious about that because you have such wonderful things to say about the Eucharist and the Mass. I mean, such penetrating insights into it. Now that you're a Catholic theologian, I just wondered, was there something profound that happened when you first attended Mass, or a special grace or something like that?
Well, there was something profound that happened when I first received the Eucharist, and I do talk about that in Sunday Will Never Be the Same. I had this sense of having finally, really become part of God's victory over sin and darkness. But, again, it wasn't in a triumphalistic way. It was in a sense that God blotted out the darkness within me, and that therefore, because God has won this victory in me, that the world is now a brighter place. So, that's a challenge to try to maintain that victory of God in me. It requires things like confession and certainly requires regular Mass and reception of communion. But it was a profound experience of that victory of God in me that I had when I first received the Eucharist, which was actually liturgically 13 years ago today. Praise God.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks be to God. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's that profound union with Christ that we experience that, but we often forget. We want to kind of run off and celebrate, but you can't move away from that relationship and expect that the darkness won't come back, or that you'll trip and fall. Yeah. So
that's right.
So you became Catholic. What was your reaction with your family?
Well, most of my family was supportive. It would have been much different if I'd been from an observant Jewish family. My sister had difficulties when I initially became Christian as a Protestant, but when I became Catholic, she was actually happy for me, because as a Protestant, I was calling myself a Messianic Jew, and I was for a time subscribing to an approach to faith that mixed Jewish and Christian prayers. And for a Jewish person, that can be offensive. The technical word for it is syncretism. It implies that one can be a sort of cafeteria Jew. And, the way we speak of cafeteria Catholics. So I think my sister appreciated that when I became Catholic, I was no longer trying just to pick and choose things from Judaism. But, the funny thing, though, is that for me, I'm more Jewish as a Catholic than certainly more than I was as a Protestant. And, although I wouldn't say now that I'm more Jewish than when I was raised Jewish, I would say that as a Catholic, I experience a fulfillment of what God was always calling me to as a Jew.
Yes, yeah, very good. Well, let's see. We're talking with Dr. Dawn Eden Goldstein about her book, Sunday Will Never Be the Same, A Rock and Roll Journalist Opens Her Ears to God. It's available through Catholic Answers Press. And Doctor, where can people go to get more information about your writings and things that you're doing?
Oh, they can go to my blog, which is dawneden, DAWNEDEN.blogspot.com, or to Twitter at Dawn of Mercy.
Very good. Oh, thank you so much for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thanks for all you do. God bless you.
And God bless you, too. And that was... I love this book. You need to pick it up. Sunday Will Never Be the Same. A rock and roll journalist opens her eyes to God. It's just wonderful. And it was a quick read, and she's a very, very good author. So check it out, folks. And, man, as always, the hour is gone. It seems like we just get started, and before you know it, it's time to shut down the dojo. Turn down the JoJo lights and shut down the Midwest Command Center. And turn our feed back to the world headquarters there in Covina. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Master Apologist Trent Horn about a brand new book that's literally just flying off the press. It's called Counterfeit Christ, and just basically wrong takes on who Jesus is. It's perfect for Good Friday. Coming up next, the dynamic duo of Catholic Talk Radio, the Terry and Jesse Show. I'm Gary Machuda. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope everybody has a very blessed and holy Thursday. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church, so I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.